September 2019, New York, a company valued at $47 billion. Its founder walks barefoot through his offices. He talks about elevating the world's consciousness. He has flown his private jet to Israel carrying marijuana in a cereal box. His name is Adam Neumann. In 6 weeks, his company will lose 78% of its value. His IPO will collapse. His board will force him out. He will leave with $1.7 billion. His employees will lose their savings. This is the documented story of a man who became the character he had invented. Adam Neumann was born on April 25, 1979, in Beersheba, Israel. His parents divorced when he was 7. He moved frequently between cities and households throughout his childhood, attending 13 different schools by the time he was a teenager. According to his biographers, this constant relocation forced him to develop a critical survival skill, the ability to enter new social environments and quickly become whoever those environments needed him to be. At age 22, Neumann left mandatory Israeli military service and moved to New York City. He enrolled at Baruch College, supposedly to study business, but according to multiple accounts, he spent most of his time on entrepreneurial schemes. His first ventures were notably eclectic. He sold collapsible high heels for women. He created padded baby clothing called crawlers. Neither succeeded commercially, but both demonstrated his core talent, pitching ideas with conviction, regardless of substance. In 2008, while still struggling with these early ventures, Neumann met Miguel McKelvey, an architect who was working on co-working concepts. The two began discussing the possibility of creating shared office spaces with community elements. Their first project was called Green Desk. It was a small shared workspace in Brooklyn, focused on environmentally sustainable practices. The business worked modestly, but Neumann sensed something larger was possible. In 2010, Neumann and McKelvey sold their stake in Green Desk and used the proceeds to launch a new venture. They called it WeWork. The original concept was straightforward: lease commercial real estate, divide it into smaller, flexible spaces, and rent those spaces to freelancers and small businesses at a premium. The basic business model was not innovative. Co-working already existed. Real estate arbitrage already existed. What would distinguish WeWork was not the model itself, but the story Neumann would build around it. From the very beginning, Neumann positioned WeWork as something more than office rental. According to early investor decks, the company was framed as a movement, a community, a way of being. The actual product was real estate. The pitch was transcendence. Neumann's personal presentation evolved alongside the company narrative. The casual founder became something more theatrical. The long hair grew longer. The clothing became more deliberately bohemian. The speech patterns adopted spiritual vocabulary. According to people who worked with him at this early stage, the transformation was gradual but unmistakable. Neumann was learning what his investors and employees wanted to believe about a young technology founder, and he was becoming that person. The early funding came from real estate investors who understood the practical business beneath the rhetoric. Joel Schreiber bought 33% of WeWork for $15 million in 2011. The company was valued at $45 million. Its locations remained few. Benchmark Capital invested in 2012, then J.P. Morgan in 2013. Each round of funding came with increased valuations not necessarily tied to financial performance. The story was working. The character of Adam Neumann was working. By 2014, WeWork had 23 locations and was valued at $1.5 billion. Neumann had become a billionaire on paper at age 35. The press began profiling him as a new kind of founder, one who combined business acumen with spiritual ambition. According to the Wall Street Journal investigation, years later, this was the period when the boundary between Adam Neumann, the person, and Adam Neumann, the founder, began to dissolve. He was no longer performing the character, he was becoming it. The company was real, the revenue was real. But the identity Neumann had constructed to sell it was beginning to consume the person who had constructed it. The narrative was no longer a tool, the narrative was him. Between 2014 and 2017, WeWork's growth became extraordinary by any measure. The company expanded from 23 locations to over 400. It entered cities across North America, Europe, Asia, and Latin America. The headcount grew from a few hundred to thousands. But the most consequential development of this period was not operational. It was the arrival of Masayoshi Son and SoftBank. Son was the Japanese billionaire founder of SoftBank, a telecommunications and technology investment conglomerate. In 2016, Son had launched the Vision Fund, a $100 billion technology investment vehicle, backed substantially by Saudi Arabian sovereign wealth. According to widely reported accounts, Son first met Neumann in 2017. The meeting was reportedly 12 minutes long. By the end of it, Son had committed $4.4 billion to WeWork. The decision was based not on financial analysis, but on what Son later described as Neumann's crazy and aggressive vision. This funding fundamentally changed everything about how WeWork operated. Suddenly, the company had access to capital so vast it dwarfed any practical real estate need. The mandate was no longer growth. The mandate was hyper-growth. The mandate was global dominance. Neumann embraced this expansion with the religious certainty that had become his defining characteristic. The barefoot walks through offices became standard. The spiritual vocabulary became more explicit. He began speaking about WeWork as a movement that would elevate human consciousness. The corporate practices reflected this elevated self-conception. Vegetarianism became mandatory at company events, justified by Neumann's stated values about environmental impact. Meat was banned from expense reports. Employees who questioned these mandates were reportedly told to embrace the company's higher purpose. Neumann's personal lifestyle scaled dramatically with the funding. He purchased a private jet, a Gulfstream G650, valued at approximately $60 million. According to multiple reports, the jet was used for both business and personal travel, with the boundary between the two essentially erased. The most widely reported incident from this period involved the jet flying from New York to Israel. According to the Wall Street Journal, and confirmed by multiple sources, marijuana was found in a cereal box on the return flight. The crew was reportedly stranded in Israel for days. Neumann's spending decisions throughout this period reflected someone who had stopped distinguishing between corporate resources and personal wishes. He purchased real estate properties under his own name. He paid himself $5.9 million from the company for the rights to the word "we," which the company already used. The construction projects became increasingly extravagant. Custom-designed offices around the world. Floor plans that prioritized photography aesthetics over functional density. Each opening was framed as a cultural event rather than a business expansion. Through all of this, Neumann remained genuinely convinced of his own transformative mission. According to people who interacted with him during this period, there was no detectable cynicism. He believed completely in what he was saying, even as the gap between rhetoric and operational reality grew. Though all-hands meetings became increasingly theatrical, thousands of employees gathered to hear Neumann speak about consciousness, energy, and the elevation of human existence. The corporate gatherings began to resemble spiritual movements more than business operations. He began making increasingly grand statements about his future. He told colleagues he intended to become the first trillionaire. He spoke about extending his vision to schools, we grow, homes, we live, and entire cities. He suggested he might become president of the world. His wife, Rebecca Neumann, had become equally influential within the company. According to multiple reports, she held significant decision-making power. Despite having no formal operational role, together, the couple operated as the spiritual leadership of what they considered to be a transformational movement. The board of directors and major investors mostly accepted these behaviors as the eccentricities of a brilliant founder. The financial valuation continued rising. The narrative continued working. As long as the story held, the substance beneath it seemed not to matter. By early 2019, WeWork had raised over $12 billion in funding. The private valuation reached $47 billion, making it the most valuable startup in the United States. Neumann's personal stake in the company was worth billions on paper. The infrastructure of validation surrounding Neumann was now total. Every interaction he had reinforced his sense of historic mission. Investors deferred, employees revered, media profiled him as a generation-defining founder. Inside this infrastructure, the original Adam Neumann had become essentially invisible. What existed instead was the fully embodied character he had spent a decade constructing. The performance was no longer a performance, it was him. In August 2019, WeWork filed its S-1 registration statement with the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is the public document that any company seeking to sell shares on a public stock exchange must submit. It would, by law, reveal everything about the company's finances, governance, and operations. Until this point, WeWork's narrative had been controlled entirely by Neumann and his team. Private investors received information selectively. Press coverage emphasized vision over numbers. The valuation reflected the story, not the substance. The S-1 filing would change all of that. Once submitted, the document became public. Analysts, journalists, competitors, and skeptics could examine the actual financial reality of WeWork for the first time. Inside the company, Neumann remained convinced this transition would be his greatest triumph. According to multiple reports, he envisioned the IPO as the moment when the public would finally recognize what he had built. He expected the valuation to reach $100 billion or more after the public listing. The S-1 itself was extraordinary in its presentation. The document opened with a dedication. We dedicate this to the energy of we, greater than any of us but inside each of us. It mentioned the word community 150 times. It described WeWork as having a mission to elevate the world's consciousness. But beneath the elevated language, the S-1 revealed financial realities that contradicted the 11-figure valuation. The company had lost $1.9 billion in 2018 alone. Revenue was growing, but losses were growing faster. The unit economics of individual locations were not improving at scale. The S-1 also revealed governance structures that troubled institutional investors deeply. Neumann had been engaged in transactions with the company that benefited him personally, selling properties to WeWork that he owned, taking loans from the company at favorable terms. The voting structure granted Neumann supervoting shares that gave him near total control of the company, regardless of his economic stake. His wife, Rebecca, was named as one of 3 people who would select his successor if he died. Wall Street analysts and institutional investors began to examine the document seriously. What they found was a real estate company being valued as a technology company. A company with severe losses being valued as if those losses were investments in future growth. A company with governance structures that would not be acceptable in any other public listing. The valuation began to slip. Initial discussions suggested the IPO might price at $47 billion, matching the private valuation. Then the conversations dropped to $35 billion, then $25 billion, then less. Through all of this, Neumann himself remained essentially convinced the IPO would succeed. According to people close to him at this period, he genuinely could not perceive what others were seeing in the financial document. The narrative he had embodied was so complete that the contradicting evidence could not penetrate. In mid-September 2019, the IPO process began to collapse openly. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Bloomberg, and other major business publications began publishing detailed reports about Neumann's behavior, financial decisions, and the gap between WeWork's narrative and its operational reality. Wall Street analysts and potential public market investors were not buying the story. The valuation could not be sustained. The IPO would not succeed at any price close to the private valuation. The S1 had revealed too much. Internal pressure within the company began to build rapidly. WeWork's senior executives and key investors recognized that the situation was unsustainable. The conversations began to shift from how to make the IPO succeed to how to manage the consequences of its potential failure. On September 16, 2019, WeWork officially delayed its IPO. The public announcement was carefully framed as a tactical postponement, but inside the company and inside the investment community, everyone understood what was happening. The story was over. Once the delay was announced, the institutional dynamics shifted completely. Investors who had previously deferred to Neumann's vision now began to ask hard questions. The board of directors, dominated by representatives of major institutional investors, began discussing options that had been unthinkable only weeks earlier. According to multiple reports, the central question became simple. Could Adam Neumann continue as CEO of WeWork given what the public now knew? The institutional investors who had funded the company at increasing valuations now faced massive paper losses. Their fiduciary duty required them to consider every option. The board began meeting more frequently. Bruce Dunleavy of Benchmark Capital and Louis Frankfurt, longtime Neumann allies, met privately to discuss the situation. According to subsequent reporting, even they had reached the conclusion that Neumann could not continue. Masayoshi Son of SoftBank, the largest investor and the person who had personally championed Neumann, joined the meetings reluctantly. His public reputation was inseparable from the WeWork investment, but the financial reality was undeniable. SoftBank's stake was already deeply impaired. The negotiations to remove Neumann from the CEO position took place over approximately 10 days in late September. According to people involved, Neumann initially refused to consider stepping down. His self-conception as the indispensable founder did not permit the idea that he could be removed from his own creation. But the financial pressure was overwhelming. Without immediate intervention, WeWork would run out of cash within months. The company that had been valued at $47 billion in January was now possibly worthless. Without new funding, employees would lose their jobs and the entire enterprise would collapse. On September 24, 2019, Neumann agreed to step down as CEO. The announcement was made publicly the following day. The man who had spent 10 years constructing the character of Adam Neumann. The visionary founder had been removed from his own company by the board he had supposedly controlled. The terms of his departure were extraordinary. Neumann received approximately $1.7 billion in compensation for stepping down and signing a non-compete agreement. This included a payment for his shares, a consulting fee from SoftBank, and a credit line. The departure package was larger than the entire annual revenue of most companies WeWork had been compared to. The contrast with his employees was stark. WeWork eliminated thousands of positions in the months following Neumann's departure. Employees who had received WeWork stock as significant portions of their compensation now held shares essentially worthless. Their savings, often invested in the company narrative, were lost. The company's valuation collapsed completely. By the end of 2019, WeWork's actual worth was a fraction of its peak. The company would eventually file for bankruptcy in November 2023. Of the $47 billion valuation, almost nothing remained for the institutional investors, employees, or other stakeholders who had believed in the story. Through all of this, Neumann himself underwent what observers described as a strange continuation of his previous behavior. He gave interviews. He maintained his public bearing. According to people who interacted with him during this period, he appeared to genuinely not understand what had happened or why. The character he had spent a decade constructing could not process the rejection. The narrative had been so complete that its failure created a kind of cognitive impossibility. He had not been wrong about himself. The world had been wrong about him. In the years following his removal from WeWork, Adam Neumann did not retreat from public life. He did not adopt a quieter posture. He did not appear to undergo significant introspection. Instead, he continued essentially as he had before, as if the catastrophic failure of his first major venture had no effect on his self-conception. He purchased significant real estate. He invested in cryptocurrency ventures. He attended events. He maintained his public bearing of visionary founder, despite having no current company to lead. In 2022, Neumann announced a new venture. He called it Flow. The company was focused on residential real estate, particularly multifamily housing, with a stated mission to reinvent how Americans rent their homes. The language was unmistakably familiar to anyone who had followed the WeWork story. The funding announcement was extraordinary. Andreessen Horowitz, one of the most respected venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, led an investment of $350 million in Flow. The company was valued at over $1 billion before launching any product or generating any revenue. The investment by Andreessen Horowitz was widely criticized in business media. Many observers questioned how the same person who had presided over the WeWork catastrophe could receive such substantial new funding at such a high valuation. The pattern seemed troublingly identical. But the investment also revealed something fundamental about how venture capital had functioned during the period of cheap money. Some founders, once they had reached a certain level of perceived visionary status, could continue operating in that mode, regardless of past outcomes. The character was funded, not the substance. Through interviews following the Flow announcement, Neumann presented himself as having learned from WeWork. He used phrases about humility and reflection, but according to people who knew him, the public statements did not match the private reality. The character of Adam Neumann remained essentially unchanged. His personal wealth had not been substantially diminished by the WeWork collapse. The $1.7 billion departure package, combined with his other investments and real estate holdings, ensured that he remained personally wealthy, regardless of what happened to the various stakeholders who had lost everything. This is perhaps the most important fact of the Neumann story for understanding modern capitalism. The system permitted and continues to permit the simultaneous total failure of an enterprise and the total personal enrichment of its founder. The mechanisms of accountability that exist in theory do not apply when the constructed character is sufficiently compelling. The Neumann case leaves history 3 concentrated lessons that connect with the central thesis of this channel. The first lesson is about identity. When we construct a character to sell something, we believe we control the character. We believe we can step outside it when needed. But identity is not separate from performance. Over time, the constructed self can become indistinguishable from the actual self. The performer becomes the role. The second lesson is about institutional validation. According to subsequent analysis, the venture capital ecosystem that funded Neumann was not deceived by him. The institutional investors understood the gap between the WeWork narrative and the WeWork operational reality. They funded him anyway because the character was sufficient to generate the funding cycle. The third lesson is the most profound. The infrastructure of validation around a sufficiently constructed identity becomes self-sustaining. Investors, employees, media, and the constructed self all reinforce each other. The truth of what is actually happening becomes irrelevant to the system. Adam Neumann's story is not about WeWork. It is about how completely a constructed identity can replace an actual self, and how an entire economic system can fund that replacement, regardless of substance. Because in the end, when the character becomes more valuable than the person, no one has any incentive to ask whether the person still exists. If you choose to witness their stories, subscribe to Rise and Ruin. Next, we follow another empire from glory to dust.